Welcome to Crisis What Crisis, where we aim to guide you towards a more resilient approach to life and whatever it might throw at you. I'm Andy Coulson, and on this podcast you'll hear from the embattled, shamed, courageous, ruined, damaged, resilient, unlucky and lucky survivors of crisis. Their stories, I hope you'll agree, are as useful as they are compelling. My guests today are Gay and Roxy Longworth, a mother and daughter who have overcome an incredibly difficult, long and dangerous mental health crisis, and who collaborated to write an extraordinarily powerful book, When You Lose It, documenting each shocking step. I should warn you now, this episode is not an easy listen, but if you're a parent to a child in this digital age, I think it's one you'll want to hear. When Roxy was just 13 years old, she was pressurised by older boys from her school into sending intimate photographs of herself. Over time, these demands grew, and finally, after a series of coercive and threatening messages, Roxy, who was hiding all of this from her family, returned to school to find the pictures had been widely shared amongst her peer group and brought to the attention of her head teacher. What followed was a series of events which led to Roxy suffering such terrifying mental trauma that she was admitted to a mental health facility, voices in her head now controlling her every move. Her breakdown caused deep distress for her, of course, but it ripped through her family as well. The book tells the story from both her and her mum's perspective in real time. The effect, as I say, is shocking but utterly compelling. This conversation is an important one, I think, because this is not, of course, an isolated incident. With children owning phones, or rather these mini computers that we put in their hands from such an increasingly young age, it's easy to lose track of what they're looking at, who they're communicating with, and what they're sharing, and of course what pressures they're under. As Roxy says, once those boys had those photos, they owned me. Roxy is now doing incredibly well, studying at university, and though at times it's clear she finds it hard to talk about some of these events, she has moved forward in her life brilliantly. And she wants to send a powerful message, not only to discourage other youngsters from doing what she did, but also to boys who may coerce others, and to teachers who, as she says, tell you a million times what not to do, but not what to do if you've already done it. My thanks to Roxy and Gay for sharing their story, and I hope you find this episode useful. Roxy and Gay, welcome, and thank you for both joining me on Crisis What Crisis.
Thank you for having us. Yes, ditto.
So this book of yours, the story it tells, of course, is extraordinary, although elements of it, I'm sure, will resonate with an enormous number of people. But it's also the way in which you've told it. The book flips from your account of events, Gay, to yours, Roxy. And as I understand it, you didn't sort of check each other's notes, right? Two separate accounts, two separate perspectives of this, a terrifying, really shared journey that you were on. I've got that right, have I?
That absolutely. In fact, the first person who read it all together was my agent and a friend of ours who's a reader. And it was only when it was put together by them that we actually sat down and read what had happened to the other one. So we wrote it blind. That's the only way we can think of explaining it. We wrote it blind.
Goodness. It's both brutal in its honesty and at times quite beautiful, brutally beautiful, because ultimately it is a two-way love letter between mother and daughter, with this sort of heartbreaking backdrop. I mean, when you finally did put those two pieces together, did it feel like that for you? I mean, how did you react when you saw the sort of complete piece, if you like?
I mean, it was terrifying. And just, I think, quite shocking. We didn't realise how little we both knew.
That's true.
But I think we were both sort of, like, the overwhelming feeling was that it was quite good. It read quite well. We were like, oh God, we might actually have something here.
Yeah. That's absolutely true. We were both sort of weeping and hugging each other, and as brutal as it is, we were like, wow, okay, this isn't nothing.
Yeah, and it just sort of comes together, those two entirely separate stories. There are points in the book where they just kind of cross the same path, and then maybe you'll kind of go off in a different direction again, but you keep then kind of, finding each other again. It is an amazing book. How do you both feel that this shared story is about to be shared with the world?
Denial, I think.
Roxy, you're just sort of smiling rather nervously.
I'm very scared. It's an extremely exposing story. That is my entire 19 years of life laid out in a book, and to read my quite complex brain, like to read about it in words just laid out on the page is quite scary. But the people, we've like started slowly telling people about it and that it's coming out, and the responses have been pretty incredible. I mean, it's sort of made me feel like the details of our story have become almost irrelevant, because whenever I start to tell people about the book, someone else's very complex, scary story comes out of them. So it sort of becomes like I think we started to realize, wow, like this, I mean, it's going to resonate with so many more people than we thought, and the specifics of our story are not so relevant.
Exactly. That's why I say it's important. I think it is going to resonate with so many people. And I want to talk about that today in terms of, the important messages that I think it communicates. So this is a multi-layered crisis story, unlike any that we've certainly had on this podcast. Roxy, if I may, I'd like to ask you to talk us through the first stage, if you like, of what happened to you. In a moment, I want you to tell those people who are listening what happened when you were 13. But before you do, I think it's important that we sort of briefly explain some of the issues that you had as a younger child, issues that included sort of crippling insomnia and night terrors, and also some terrible bullying, violent bullying, as a young girl at school.
From the age of 4, I found sleep a very, very scary place. I mean, the word like anxiety is a word that wasn't what it like now. I would say that, but at the time, obviously, it doesn't feel like anxiety. I was just terrified. I pretty much read. I think I got through on about 4 hours of sleep from the ages of 4 till about 13. I read all night. I wouldn't really let myself fall asleep.
I mean, I eventually you stayed in bed. Eventually you'd sort of give up and stay in bed. So I assumed you were asleep.
Roxy, you look back now on those early years of your childhood as the sort of, the first pebbles in the river, if you like, before your crisis finally breaks the surface. Do you attach significance when we come to later stages of this story? Do you attach significance to those earlier moments? I mean, you've glossed over the bullying. The bullying was deeply unpleasant, as you describe it in the book, as a young girl. What significance do you sort of attach to those moments now?
I mean, it's easy now. It's easy now to look back and look at those events and link it all together. I guess it's always been this like not being comfortable in my own head and in my own brain. I suppose I battled with my own brain for my whole life, and I just didn't really realize until that big crisis when I was 13, 14.
Yeah. Except that the bullying is not a battle in your own head, is it? That's other people and unpleasantness, to put it mildly. You make the decision, though, to go to it's your decision, as I understand it, to go to boarding school at 10. You felt that was the right place for you at the right time. And at first, I think it worked quite well, didn't it? I mean, you still were dealing with your issues with sleep, and there's some scary stuff there that you describe in the book. But you're a very talented child at that stage, and talented academically and with your sport. And it sort of worked, didn't it? At first, boarding school.
It worked. Yeah, it worked. I never had to sleep on my own. I was always with at least 6 other people. that was very good. I did start sleeping with hockey sticks. That probably slightly less healthy.
And the hockey sticks are there because you there's protection, right?
Yeah. I mean, not rational, but yes.
Well, it's quite rational, actually.
Yeah.
You think something's coming to get you, you get a weapon.
Yes, exactly.
It did one point get to 5 hockey sticks. Then I got called into a teacher's office, quite rightly, I think. Boarding school worked. I still struggled with the people in my year. I didn't find the kind of hanging out. I loved school. I liked the lessons. I was good at that. I found the kind of hanging out and chatting, I found it difficult.
Let's fast forward a little bit then to 13. And like a lot of 13-year-old girls, there's a lot of stuff going on in your life, in your school, obviously is a huge part of your life, and on your phone. By then, presumably, you're like everyone else. You've got a phone where you can communicate in lots of different ways, including social media.
Yeah, when that happened, when Rox went to seniors, to her, to upper school, senior school.
Yeah. So what you describe in the book, Roxy, really is an addiction that slowly develops. I don't know whether you would phrase it that way, but it seems to be an addiction to attention. Is that right? Is that an accurate description? That's sort of fueled by the technology, if you like.
Yeah, it didn't feel like addiction, but now looking back, that kind of it was like a hit. It was like a buzz.
At one point, though, in the book, I think you say that without that buzz of attention, you felt like you might die without it. It was sustaining. It was almost life sustaining. Is that? Do you remember that sort of feeling that it gave you? Because I think this is, there are a number of several important elements to your story, but this is certainly one of them that will resonate, I think, with so many young girls. That idea that it becomes such an important, sustaining part of your life.
Yeah, this isn't in the book because I wrote that without hindsight, but I now can remember that feeling clearly because I feel it now, just with the way that my brain works. That kind of need to feel something, to feel fulfilled. Like I'm, as if I'm sort of not feeling content without something intense going on.
Yes.
I recognize it now and I can deal with it now, but back then I was looking for something to kind of fill this hole, I suppose. And to make, and it wasn't, and it didn't last. It was very quick. So I was always needing to be kind of replenish this feeling, this attention, this thing that made me feel good.
Give me a sense, if you can, of how it sort of worked, sort of, almost operationally. Your day starts and these cravings begin for what we describe here as attention. It's more complex than that, of course. So how would it work? How would your day operate? How would it manifest itself?
Well, it was a much more complex process than that. We're not talking about you wake up one day and you want to like find this feeling. It's this slow thing that starts. Like I just get a phone. I've just gotten a phone, and I start to get texts from people, from friends, and that feels good. And then that sort of becomes normal. And then I started to feel much old. I didn't feel like I was 13. I felt much older, and this much older guy started texting me, who was at my school, but he was 17 at the time and I was 13. And that was when it started. And it's slow. It's like,
it's incremental, isn't it?
Yeah, like it's not
incremental, and also you're not alone, right? This is not like you're the only. This is you're bouncing off your peer group, you're bouncing off your friends. It's slightly, I suspect, got a slightly sort of competitive element to it as well.
Yes, definitely. I mean, teenage girls talk about boys, and it's a bit pathetic, but you do, like, that's what you chat about. And I finally could sort of join into that conversation, which I hadn't, as I said, I hadn't found easy when I was younger. And I think I felt that people were the girls were slightly impressed. You know, these guys were older, popular, good looking, and I'd never been considered particularly, like, I wasn't cool at school. The guys didn't like me when I was younger. I mean, and then I think when that started, I mean, I was flattered like anybody would be. I was.
So tell us what happened, Roxy, in your own words, please.
So, guys had started showing more and more attention, started texting me, and that was okay. Couple boys had asked for photos in bikinis, and like, it hadn't felt so awful. I mean, people post photos in their bikinis on their social media, on their public social media. It hadn't felt that wrong. And then this guy who was quite a lot older started texting me, and we were just chatting, only on text, obviously, not in person. And then he would say things like, "Send something nice," and like, and I didn't. I mean, it's terrifying. I didn't feel that confident. I mean, it wasn't like, yeah, I didn't feel that confident in what I looked like, and it was scary. I didn't send anything, and I don't know, didn't feel like I could just say no, so I would come up with sort of excuses for why I couldn't. Like, I was babysitting, or I was with people, and things. And then
this boy's 17, right?
Yeah, and I'm 30. And he keeps asking, and then I said no for a few weeks, and then he started calling me frigid, which I found very hurtful. And then he started saying that if you know, he would start to sort of ignore my messages and not text me after a while, and I hated that. That made me feel just disgusting, and like rejected. I mean, yes, rejected, but like, it was more than that. It was like this kind of internal feeling of just kind of self-hatred. It's really hard to say these things because they feel so ludicrous now. So, and then he would say things like, "If you don't send them, I'm going to have to tell everyone how frigid you are." And
so this is now, so this is the point at which it becomes blackmail. I
wouldn't say that. I mean, I struggle with the word blackmail. Coercion, maybe pressure, a lot of pressure.
Right. Interesting.
It wasn't blackmail. I mean,
because there wasn't a threat attached to it, if you like, that you didn't think. What do you think, Gay?
I think it's hard to quantify. It's not like somebody's coming. It's hard to say blackmail, because blackmail feels like something so enormous.
Yes.
Again, with the benefit of hindsight, if there's a transaction involved, then it is blackmail. It doesn't have to be financial. The transaction here was attention and popularity.
Yes.
But I don't want people to think that, because if, blackmail is a very strong word. So I think what that allows people who are putting pressure on other people to do is to say, well, I'm not blackmailing anybody. Like, this is.
I understand what you're saying. Yeah.
So that's why I'm called.
What you're saying is coercion was enough, right?
Coercion, pressure is enough.
Pressure is enough. Yes.
It doesn't need to be blackmail for it to be naughty.
Yes. Very important. Okay.
That's when and I felt I didn't want to send these photos. It was scary, but I didn't want him to stop talking to me either. And that was the other option. Yes. So I started off with kind of vests and bikini tops, and it got worse.
Okay. So, Gay, perhaps you can pick it up from here. When does this sort of, become a problem that you are aware of?
when I am called in to the school and there are 3 people sitting in an office and I have absolutely no idea what I'm in there for, and a male teacher who I don't know says, your daughter has been sending photos to boys. And that was basically how it, and the sort of floor, just the floor opened up at that moment. And that was weeks and weeks after Roxy had been dealing with months. It was months later. I mean, you know, we were a good 3-4 weeks into term. And so the short answer is I knew nothing. By the time I knew something, Roxy's life was effectively over at school, the life she'd had before, because by the time the teachers knew, those photos that she'd sent to one person were everywhere.
Yes. So there's this period of time where Roxy is really going through a truly nightmarish scenario for a 13-year-old girl. Let's just keep reminding the listener here. And she's to say that you are hiding it from your mum. I don't know whether those are the right words, but for good reason, you were trying to find a way through it, right? On your own. And it must have been an unbelievably difficult, you've had so many difficult moments, Roxy, but that must have been an unbelievably difficult period of time for you before that meeting with the teachers.
Yeah, but by the time my parents found out, I mean, it was so far gone. I felt like a complete shell of myself. So there was not really much my parents could have done. I mean, that there had been months of basically avoiding my mum,
which I had keenly felt, by the way.
Right. So give us a flavour, Roxy, of what was happening during that period of time.
I find it really, sorry, you can clearly tell I find it quite difficult to talk about. I haven't got a clear answer for why I did it. I find it hard to talk about because there's this seriously complex mix of feelings with responsibility, but also, I was 13. I have to remind myself I was 13.
Yeah.
And I still struggle with that. Because I take, I did do it. So once I'd sent photos to this guy, maybe a month later, I got a text from a random guy who I didn't know on Facebook, I think. And he just said something like, hello. I just ignored him. I didn't know who it was. And then he said, can you send me a photo? Like, second message. I was like, again, I just ignored him. Didn't know who this guy was. And then he sent me a photo of myself. And that's when this became like blackmail. He said that if I didn't send him what he was asked for, he would send the photos he already had to his cousin who was in my year at school. We were not friends. She didn't like me very much. And I knew she would send she would send them to everybody. So that wasn't an option. And now when I read the book, obviously I'm just sitting there like, just don't send it. Like, what are you doing? But it didn't feel like it wasn't, I couldn't live if anybody else saw those. Like, it wasn't an option to keep going after that. So it didn't feel like a choice.
So let's talk about the school's reaction when this becomes apparent. Yeah. Gay, perhaps you can summarize how the school responded, because as I understand it, you touched on it a moment ago, the first thing that's almost being communicated is the fact that you, Roxy, were sharing these images, right? Not that you were being coerced or pressured into sharing them by boys who were considerably older than you. it's this idea that you are sharing the images and that somehow is the primary offence. Have I got that right?
Yeah. Roxy has been sending photos to boys. And I remember sitting on the sofa thinking, photos, boys, plural, sending. And honestly, it was like being punched in the solar plexus. So for a little bit of time, you sort of almost go numb, because you can't, you emotionally respond. And I just sort of didn't know what to, I didn't know what to say to that. And he made it quite clear that these photos weren't the okay sort of photos.
Can I just explain that before this, for the month before this, so once that guy had started threatening me to set and asking me to send more, the requests had gotten worse and worse, and I had sent them until he had asked for some pretty bad videos, and that is when I blocked him on social media. And then I waited, and then I got a text randomly one night. I thought I'd sort of almost forgotten about it, and I got a text from this guy maybe 3 days before school started, who I hadn't spoken to in a couple of years, who was in my year at school, really randomly. And as soon as I saw his name on my phone, I was like, okay, it's happening. And he had sent me 4 photos of myself. And then the day that school started, we'd be in the car on the way to school, and my phone had rung, random number, unknown number. It was like a blocked caller, and I picked up, and someone asked me if this was the number for the local prostitute, and then hung up. And then that was and then I went into school the next day knowing that everybody knew and had them. And
3 weeks after that, I was called into the office, right? 3 weeks.
Right. Okay. God, you've been alone with it for such a long time.
Yeah.
Let's move forward in the story. I do want to pick up on this point about the school a little bit later, but I'd like you to do it really from the perspective of where you are now rather than in that moment. But things develop quite sort of dramatically from this point. Obviously, the pressure that you are under is enormous. But you begin to self-harm, to cut yourself. Gay, tell us, please, from your perspective, what happens when you first discover that and how you first discover that.
Well, friends had mentioned it to me, but I'd seen nothing for myself. So, and Rox said no one was talking to her, so it was, I didn't really know what was going on. But then the school phoned and confirmed it, and they just said they were sending her home because they couldn't keep her safe. So I rang the GP surgery, got the duty doctor ran me back and basically talked me through not overreacting, keeping as calm as possible. It was quite common. And the most important thing was to keep everything clean, so nothing got infected. And so that is what I tried to do. And then a few weeks later, we were sitting in a pub, and Rox just fiddled with her hair. And when she lifted her arm up, the jumper went to, and the wounds on her side were so deep and very different. And I realized immediately that I wasn't supposed to see those. And it was, I actually didn't know what to do, because I realized that things had changed. And I didn't say anything to Rox for about 2 or 3 days. I didn't really know what to do. But so the advice to keep them clean, that was no longer good. That was no longer good enough advice. That wasn't working anymore.
So when you read each other's accounts now of that time, I mean, Roxy, first you, when you read how your mum is reacting at that moment, I mean, how does that feel to read it now?
I mean, I so felt that she thought I was attention seeking, making a big deal out of, these photos that everybody was doing that just hadn't been that important. And I hadn't really explained about the photos, about how deep I'd gotten into everything. But it wasn't like a God. There was no sort of care coming. It was like, this is a bit annoying. Like, this is an inconvenience. Like, snap out of it, basically.
There's some truth in that. I mean, that kind of, okay, this has happened. You in my head, I was like, look, there's this element of playing with fire. I've never seen the photos. I still, again, until I read the book, I didn't know that. I had no idea the extent of the trouble that Rox, was in because of the pressure. So, there was a part of me which was like, okay, they all send photos. This has got out of hand. It got out of hand. I want you to go back to your old life. I didn't understand that there was really no going back to the old life. I think I was just trying to fix it and move on and underplay it and not overreact and actually how that appeared to Rox was cold, unfeeling, uncaring, and not really bothered. But actually, what was really happening with, Rox's dad and me were like free falling. But, you're trying to put on a brave face. And
of course. Gay, you introduce a counsellor into the process around this point, I think I'm right in saying. A counsellor who effectively turns, it's clear from both accounts, sort of turns mother against daughter. Your account of that process as a parent is terrifying to read. Now, you've both had, Roxy, maybe you sort of, I've misinterpreted your view of that period, but please tell me if I have, but you've both had, it seems from the book, good and bad counsellor experiences. How did you both maintain faith in sort of professional help, if you like?
Good question.
It took me a long time to go and speak to somebody professional. A long time. I would say Roxy was, doing A-levels by the time I actually went and spoke to anybody.
And I didn't find anybody. I didn't find the person who was like incredible until A-levels as well. That also, the counsellor you're speaking about, the school made me go and see her, not my parents. The school made me, as part of my 3 punishments, one of them was that I had to go and have counselling to deal with the self-esteem issues, which had made me
these were you used the word punishments there. Was that how it was? That was how it was framed, was it?
Yes, there were 3. And
what were the other 2? What were the other 2 out of interest?
I was house-gated, so I had to stay in my. So I had to sit whenever I wasn't in lessons. I couldn't leave my common room at school. And the other one was that I had to write a reflective essay on why I shouldn't do what I had done again.
But these were couched as punishments.
Yes, these were my 3.
What happened to the boys?
Well, the school did not send them to have counselling to deal with why they had pressured an underage girl into sending photos. Yeah. I think they weren't like they were like they had to stay in their common room for like 1 day.
I don't know. Yeah. No one told me.
No, they weren't suspended.
We'll be right back after this. As regular listeners know, Crisis What Crisis is brought to you with a little help from Mindstream, a personal well-being music company designed to create those calmer moments in our hectic lives. Mindstream can really help put you back on track and guide you towards the mindfulness that we all need to function more effectively. And I can tell you from personal experience that it really works. Mindstream music is cleverly designed to help regulate your body's response to stressful situations by slowing your heartbeat and guiding you towards that more calmer state. They also have playlists to stimulate your brain, helping to keep you focused and engaged for longer periods of time. Getting your mindset right is the absolute key when you're navigating a crisis, or if you're just struggling with day-to-day pressures. You'll find them at mindstream.com. That's mind with a Y. They're also on Spotify, Apple, Amazon, wherever you download your music from. So take back some control and consider making a Mindstream playlist one of your crisis cures. I don't think you'll regret it. And now back to Gay and Roxy. Let's move on again, because I feel like I'm skimming over a lot of very important kind of material here, but we don't have enough time to cover it all. And I'm going to say this now, and I'm going to say it again at the end. Buy the book and you can read it all. But things do escalate, and in a very dramatic, in a terrifying way. Social services are involved at this stage for reasons that you can read about in the book. But suffice to say that the relationship between the two of you is at a pretty difficult stage at this moment. And you're told, Gay, that your daughter is very, I think the words are, your daughter is very, very ill. And you, Roxy, are beginning to hear voices. You believe that there are people surrounding you. What's happening, of course, is you're already in the midst of a very serious mental health crisis, but this is one that's now taken a different turn and a much more dangerous turn for you. Tell us, if you can, Gay, about the moment when that sort of manifests itself. There's a moment when I think you were sitting with your grandmother, Roxy. Your grandmother leaves the room, and Gay, you walk back into what I assume is a bedroom.
Yes. So Rox had made it clear she didn't want to be with any of us, and sometimes I know that is true, but on this occasion, I didn't feel right about leaving her on her own. So I went up and I walked into her door, and I could just see the back of her, just her back, and she'd opened the bedroom window and she was sitting facing out. So I could just see the curve of her back, and she was just sitting on the windowsill with her legs dangling out of the window. And she couldn't see me, so I didn't want to frighten her and, inadvertently make her tip out, which I thought might be possible. And I asked her what she was doing quietly, and she said she couldn't. She was sitting on the window ledge because the room was too crowded, and of course her room was empty. And I knew then we were in a whole different area of mental health at that point.
Can you begin to tell us how you felt at that moment? Okay.
Well, it's really interesting. I can understand why people can be shot and still run 3 miles and not realise they're bleeding out. It is a bit like that. I stood in this empty bedroom, and there were people everywhere, and I absolutely 100% believed that her room was full of people, because her voice was different and her eyes were very different. And I thought I'd just got to get her in off that ledge, because, all she had to do was tip forward, and that would have been that. So you go phenomenally calm although I can feel my heart pulsating as I tell you this now, because I can see myself in that room like it was a second ago. But when you're faced with that, not being calm isn't going to help. So you it's like you sort of suck in all your energy from your extreme digits. It's like you almost go cold, and your blood just has to go to your brain, and you've got to think about how what to do so you don't make the situation worse. So it was weirdly calm. I was really pleased I had my mum there, and I got her in. I can't really remember getting you in. I remember us then sitting on the floor with our back to the radiator, and the people stayed for quite a long time after that. We lived with the people.
And that was your instinctive reaction. That's what's so interesting about this, right? Is that this wasn't something that you were taught to do, or that you had read about, or that you've been advised, the approach you're advised to take. You know, you instinctively knew that that's how you had to handle that moment.
Something instinctive took over, but you never know if you're doing the right thing.
No, of course. Yeah.
You know, I just knew it was really, really important to do this well for her. So,
as I mentioned earlier, it's perfectly clear how ill Roxy is, and you then, with Adam, of course, your husband, you then are on a mission really to try and get Roxy the right help. The Child and Adolescent Mental Health Services is the first port of call for someone in that situation and at that age. Would you mind again just telling us what happened there? It's the two of you in the car. You are desperately trying to get her to the clinic and to essentially to safety, right?
But it's a very long road, and it's very straight, and it's surrounded by a very mature pine woodland. And I've just got my eye on the road, and Roxy opens the passenger door. Luckily, she hasn't taken her seatbelt off, so it's more, she'd done the door, then was going for the seatbelt. Just lucky that she hadn't done the other way around. I lean over, grab the door, pull it back, keep my hand on the handle, drive with my other hand, but there's nowhere to stop. And Rox tells me that it's too dangerous. The people are telling her it's too dangerous. She has to get out. It's not safe in the car. And I think that is the first time that I speak directly to the people who would had a. And I said, I've been driving for longer than the people. I know that falling out of a car is unsafe. So you're going to have to listen to me. They're going to have to listen to me because they're wrong. It's unsafe to open the car door. And when I can pull over, I'll pull over. And I couldn't stop for quite a long time because I was terrified that pulling over on that road, it was too dangerous because the cars were moving too fast. And if she decided to go into the road, we'd both be dead.
Yes.
So we pull into a little cul-de-sac, and then we debate. I debate with the people, and we convince the people to let Rox get back in the car. And so we get back in the car and we drive to the services.
I mean, Roxy, we're telling this story now. I mean, I'm assuming that you don't remember much of it. How did it feel or do you? I don't know. But how did it feel to read it? How does it feel to hear it now?
I have no recollection of that car day. No. Didn't know until I read my mum's part. There were quite a few scenes like that I just have not happened. I remember the windowsill part. I wrote a diary. So there's quite a lot that I don't know if I remember or if I've just read my diary section. So.
Okay. So you kept a diary throughout, did you?
Yeah. So I kept a diary when people were talking to me.
The diary, there was a really sweet girl who had some issues of her own at school in the year about a couple of years above. And she gave her the journal and she said, "This helped me."
Right.
And it was sweet. So, and she started it from right the day she was sent home from school. You started writing, didn't you?
Yeah.
All the way through.
The issue is that although there's a clear point from my mum where she saw that I was ill, like you said, it's obvious now that Roxy's ill. It had been like 2 months where I had been deteriorating. So that there isn't a moment like that for me.
Yes, of course.
And so I said before that, when I was a child, I felt this battle with my brain, and this feeling like I had this overwhelming voice in my head telling me to do things like keep hockey sticks in my bed. And that voice just sort of got louder and louder and more controlling until it wasn't really a battle anymore, and I was just being told what to do. But it was a really, really slow progression.
That journey ends with you arriving at a clinic. That's the start of not an immediate, but a process that then ends, Gay, with you quite understandably deciding that the answer for Roxy is to get her a bed on a psychiatric, actually in an adolescent psychiatric clinic, and you succeed in doing that. You actually fight pretty hard, right? That is not an easy thing. And maybe this is the right point to talk about, what your view is, both of you, on our approach to these. We would sort of take a moment just in the midst of all this, our approach to these issues, particularly with people in their teenage years. The help that you get, the process that we have, the access that we have in this country to these kind of services. What's the pair of you? What's your reflection on it? What's your view of it?
Well, we got the most amazing social worker. She was standout, and I thank her for a great deal, because she stayed on the phone when I was just needed advice, even though she was no longer, because we'd been signed off out of social services. So we got really lucky with her. The headlines that there is a crisis in the mental health services is absolutely true. I think an awful lot of people they all go into the services with the best of intentions, but you have to be really, really, really ill to get that help. But by the time you're that ill, really what you are being is sort of restrained almost. That is the reality of the situation.
Roxy, what about you?
I couldn't talk about the photos at all at this point, and every time we saw a doctor, the first thing they said was things like, "What can I help you with? Tell me what's happened." No one ever had passed it on to the next person, and I couldn't speak about these things. I hadn't told my parents really what had happened. So I just went silent, and then I really couldn't get help because I wasn't speaking to them. But the fact that I remember these two people said to me that I'd only have to say it once, and then not again. And then the next appointment we went into, the first thing he asked was tell me again, and I couldn't. The hospital, the people who worked inside the hospital were incredible. Like, these young, not much older than I am now, working these crazy hours and just doing the most incredible work.
Dealing with very, very ill young people with very acute problems. Yeah.
Yeah, and the system was didn't work for them either. So, we all had to be on one-to-one, where we all have some, they were stopping us hurting ourselves or killing ourselves, that we weren't there to get better. Well, we, supposedly we were, but that wasn't gonna work. We were all supposed to be on one-to-one, where we had a person who worked there with us within a meter, like at least a meter away from us at all times. But there was one guy there who was on 4-to-1, who needed 4 people with him, and there were just 1.5 people, so we all had to sit in a corridor.
Let's pick it up there. You're in the hospital for a while, but your mum decides, actually, again, your instincts, Gay, your instincts are, this is not right, and although they may well be keeping my daughter safe, she's not going to get better here. Seems to be from the book, the sort of decision that you're making in your head, and you take on and you know what you're doing. I think the extraordinary decision, together with Adam, that you're going to take this on, because you know that by bringing her out of hospital, you're really kind of bringing her home, and you are going to be responsible, which is an astonishing decision. Just tell me, about that decision, and give me a flavour of what happens in those weeks and months after you've made the decision and the two of you are at home together.
Well, there were definitely moments when I thought I had made a terrible, terrible mistake. I will say that. I thought I'd done the wrong thing, but I realised because Roxy stopped eating or drinking inside the unit, and she had begged me for help. She had begged me on the floor in the fetal position for me to get help. And when I realised that that wasn't going to happen quickly enough for us in that place, and having been told by all the staff, if she begs you to come home, whatever you do, don't take her out. She didn't beg me. She had just retreated somewhere even further than from the person I had delivered. And
just remind me how long Roxy had been in the unit for.
2 days.
I mean, literally hardly any time. But I mean, they did tell me, it was no time at all. But it was going into a weekend where there was no therapeutic care for the weekend.
Yeah, but what's interesting to me, and there are, by the way, many moments during the course of the book that reinforce this point. But you work that out, Roxy. You're seriously ill at this point, and yet you are able to work out the fundamental truth of that place. You are able to work out this is not a place where this place might keep me safe, but this is not a place where I'm going to get well. I mean, there are these little moments during the course of your story where you have absolute clarity about what you're doing and a sort of ability to sort of cut through it all, literally cut through these voices that you have to see the truth of the situation. It's quite a thing.
Yeah, it did feel like that. And I think, the thing about that place is that I think the other kids in there. Oh,
makes you really sad thinking about that.
Yes, understandably so.
I mean, I think it is true, and I say it right at the beginning of the book that it's my job as Roxy's primary caregiver to keep her safe, and so I as a parent, I definitely felt like a failure for a lot of that time.
And we after, this is skipping forward a lot, but after I got better, we didn't really speak for quite a long time. I didn't feel like I had been protected. I didn't feel like I'd been protected at all.
Until you read what your mum had written?
Yes. I mean, what my reading the book meant that I understood so much more, like your position and where everything had come from. I still probably haven't completely come to terms with how unprotected and alone I felt for so long.
Mm-hmm.
But I understand it more. I just probably haven't fully forgiven for it yet. Trying to.
Let's just fill in a couple of the blanks in the story, if I may. So you've come back. I've alluded to it, but that your recovery, like a lot of recoveries, was not on a straight line. There were proper ups and downs. But at no point you decide, Gay, that, or maybe you did, I don't know, but I can't do this. There doesn't seem to be that point in the story where you come close to giving up. The pressure, not just for you, the pressure for you and your marriage with, and Adam, you've got 2 other daughters, your life, you're a very successful woman. You've got a professional life to maintain. The pressure to find some other way of getting this handled must have been enormous, but you chose not to.
one of the benefits of Roxy having gone into the unit was I knew exactly how it felt to have her not with me. And nothing will feel as bad. Even with all the ups and downs, and what I would really like to say about the ups and downs for anyone in this situation, recovery is full of ups and downs. And it took me a long time to realize that the downs were never quite as bad. But I knew what it felt not to be caring for her. And that was worse, however bad it did get and exhausting.
The sending of the photos and the subsequent coercion is the word that we all use. This is really the reason why you both chose to write this book. It's the reason why it's important. What would you say, Roxy, to your 12-year-old self now as she sort of excitedly unwraps her first iPhone?
Well, I suppose what I wish I'd felt when I was 13 was that I, was an interesting enough, like, I wish I'd valued myself enough to think that I was an interesting, cool enough person for somebody to like me without having to send photographs. And I wish that I could explain to that kid that, firstly, that she's a child, because I definitely didn't feel like that. I think it helps now that both my sisters are older. I mean, my youngest sister is over a year older than I was then. So now I can look at my sister and remind myself and think, oh my God, you were over a year younger than she is now. That helps. Wish I could say that to her. I wish I could try and explain that, like, this is always so much hindsight, but I wish that 12, 13-year-old person had someone she could have gone to, really, because I was so alone. But also to explain that, I don't know if I can say this, but like, I worry that because, that porn is extremely widely available, like, so the fact that these guys were asking for these photos, I worry has more to do with power and control and being able to own some. I mean, they owned me as soon as they had them. Like, I thought it was kind of sexy and flirty, but like, they have porn and like photos of girls, like, much more attractive than some 13-year-old kid.
You actually say in the book, Roxy, this is not to yourself, but this is to kind of other girls who may be who may find themselves in a similar situation. You actually say, but to the 13, 14, 15-year-old girls, if you're sending these photographs, then you probably think that there's no way what happened to me will happen to you. I thought that too. I'd heard stories of people whose lives were ruined, but that wasn't enough to stop me. I promise you, it is not worth it.
How do we get a 13-year-old to listen to that message? Because they are told all the time, there are loads and loads of PSHE sessions out there all saying, don't do this, don't do that. But but you have to cut through the attraction of it and speak to the other side. As Rox said, we're told a million times what not to do, but we're never told what to do if we have done that.
Also, can I just say that, like, instead of talking to the 12-year-old girl about why not to send photos, I think you also need to, someone needs to talk to the person who feels the need to pressure people into sending photos.
Of course, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. A fundamentally important point. The book ends when you're 16, Roxy. It ends with your outstanding GCSE results, but also an unbelievably eloquent self-diagnosis, an understanding, you sort of touched on it during the course of this conversation, but an understanding of what sort of caused your crisis. And as you put it, of how your brain works. Can you just give us a flavor of that process and how you've been able to reach that point? You're now 19. How you've managed to reach that point, and what, as you look back on your crisis, we talk about this a lot on the podcast with people who've been through very different crises to you, but the importance of trying to find some perspective about it. How did you do that? What is the approach that you took, aside from the help that you've had and we've discussed? How have you found a sense of perspective?
I have literally spent every day since I decided that I was going to sort of turn my life around, trying to work out how to manage my brain in a sustainable way.
Mm-hmm. Sleep is incredibly important. And we started the story with your insomnia as a child. Sleep's incredibly important, right?
Sleep's important, and I know occasionally I slip into weeks where I start sleeping less and less, and that is a big sign I need to sort something out. That still happens. I don't take pills to help me sleep anymore, but I did have to for quite a long time, and sometimes if I step back into it, then I need to. I use distraction a lot. I sort of have to weigh up between just distracting myself enough to kind of stay on top of things, and then when I'm feeling strong, I can start to introduce not distracting myself enough to kind of embrace how I'm feeling. But I'm not really answering your question, am I?
You have answered my question. Roxy, at one stage you are seen by a neurosurgeon. In actual fact, Gay, there's a passage in the book where you sort of describe how you are hoping that there is something sort of physical wrong because it will provide an explanation. It's not astonishing. An Argentinian doctor, I think. We're going to use that word. We're going to use that word brutal again. Brutal simplicity. She tells you, boys are bastards, girls are bitches. Don't let them steal one more day. Now, that may be a slight oversimplification of your crisis and your battle through it, Roxy, and Gay. But my word, that's a great piece of crisis advice, isn't
it? She was brilliant, wasn't she?
I mean, I feel like we can agree that I was still very, very ill at that point. And that's the only time that we walked out of the room together and we were like, oh my God, we might get out of this.
Amazing. And so it can come, right? There's a woman who you hadn't spent a lot of time with, presumably before then, who didn't know you very well. And yet there comes a piece of advice. And there's a truth to it, isn't it, right? Keep your eyes and your ears open, I think, when you're in crisis always. Actually, there is another I prefer, Gay. And it's there in the book again when you say, I think this is your sort of crisis formula. You'll correct me if I'm wrong. Generosity of spirit is the greatest strength of all. Happiness is the greatest revenge. Courage is essential. I think I prefer that one, actually. It's quite brilliant. Look, we have skimmed through this story, as is the nature of podcasting, but it's all there for people to read. When You Lose It is the title of the book. It's published in early July. Please do go and buy it. I think it is essential reading for parents. I think it's essential reading for anyone who is interested in what it is to be a modern teenager, and also to understand and try and navigate what we know is a growing problem here and elsewhere with young people's mental health. So thank you both for writing it. I'm going to finish here, though, by asking you for your crisis cures.
Okay. For me, find people who know more than you do. That is my number one. I mean, like friends of friends, neighbours, local pharmacist, anyone. That's key in the kind of position I was in.
Roxy.
I can't lie. I probably haven't completely mastered my crisis handling techniques. But I'd say
I'd say your kind of black belt. It's perfectly clear. You're like some kind of crisis management ninja.
But I work very hard. I just fully 100% commit, and I just work really hard a lot of the time, all the time. And I always make sure I'm doing at least 4 things at once, because I manage best when I have as little time to think as possible.
I happen to know that we had to change the time of this recording because of that, because you've been doing some GCSE tutoring. Am I right?
Yes.
So work. Okay. It's a theme that comes up a lot, actually, when we have this conversation. There's the sort of, not just the solace of work, but its importance in crisis. Okay, Gay, you've got another.
I'm the absolute opposite. I need to go to a really quiet place. And I actually do that by coming out of my head and back into my body. And I have a trick for that, which is to stand on one leg, because I have to balance. You have to focus to balance. And if that doesn't work, try doing it on tiptoes. And if that doesn't work, do it with your eyes closed. And that definitely gets you to focus the mind. That's my second, stand on one leg.
Oh my God, we are so different. My second one is that I found an amazing therapist who helped me navigate my way through working out where I could take responsibility for things I'd done and where I needed to accept that I'd been taken advantage of. And he was just incredible, and he showed me how to manage my brain and use it to my advantage.
I would say when you're trying to make really big decisions, when you don't know the outcome and the outcome could be fatal, I would say try and not make decisions, make choices. And I guess my number 1 and number 2 lead to that. It's like, if you have all the information you can and you go to a quiet place, then you can make a choice. And if they don't work out, you can look back and think, I did what I could, knowing what I did at the time. So I would say don't make decisions. Try and make choices.
My third one is that I draw cubes.
She does on everything.
Literally everywhere. It can get pretty obsessive sometimes, but also I can use them to help kind of ground myself and keep myself calm when I feel like I'm spiraling. But yeah, maybe not the most sane crisis cube.
Super. Thank you both for your time and for your story. It was incredibly valuable. And I'll say it just one more time. When You Lose It, published in July. Go and buy it. Thank you both.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Andy.
If you've enjoyed this episode, please do give us a rating and a review. It really helps. And if you hit subscribe, wherever you download your podcast from, you'll find loads more useful crisis conversations. You can also follow us on Instagram and Facebook. Our handle is @CrisisWhatCrisisPodcast. Thanks again for listening.